So these are not made up solutions for any routing problems, and they are using or they have to be run on a Postgres, PostGIS database, and then you can do your routing. And so basically it's an open source, that it's a library that runs in a database that is PostGIS enabled, and then you have PG routing. So let's talk about OSM to PG routing. We use OSM data, open software. We like openness. So OSM to PG routing, what it does, it converts OSM data to something that can be used in PG routing directly. But don't forget, every graph will depend on your application. You still need to do final refinement for your graphs to do a real application. But this helps a lot, okay? Currently, it only works on .osm files. One of our plans is that it can also work for PBF and O5M. That's so that it's more flexible, but it's a plan. About QGIS, we can plug in, we have the plugin PG routing layers that can be used in QGIS. And again, it's basically, you have to think about it as it's something simple that you can use so that you can see how it works, but it's not for a final application. For a final application, you need to set up the working graph with all the details. But it helps a lot to see how PG routing works. And vehicle routing problems like garbage collection. So you can see here, down here, it's a garbage truck. And this is Montevideo, and all the green dots are containers for garbage, and the trucks had to go and pick up the containers, and we had to find for a fleet of trucks find the containers and make the smaller set of routes. So that is a vehicle routing problem. And it was like they pick up the containers, the truck gets full, goes to the dump, goes back to the depot, maybe to change drivers, and has to go back to the city. Okay? So that can be done with vehicle BRP routing. So, PG routing. What do we think about PG routing? Well, it's basically we think about routing. It's we are here, and we want to go there. How do I do it? Well, in elementary school, they told us, hey, the closest, the shortest path is going to be a straight line between 2 points. So we draw that. And then we put the same thing into context, and we'll say, oh, something's wrong. So this PG routing elephant has now the feathers because it's a bird. The bird can only do this kind of traversing the city of Prizren. And therefore, we're using PG routing in a representation, in a graph representation of a city, which is this idea. This, you can see the intersections of the streets and the streets, but the same graph, which is, let's say, we're representing the city with this graph. But the same graph, this is the same graph, with the nodes located in a different position. And it can be a representation of the relation of the people, okay? And we don't have a latitude, longitude attached to us. And PG routing allows to find shortest relationships between people. How do I relate from 9 to 15? The shortest path, for example. So it doesn't need to have a geometry attached. It's to solve graph problems. For example, also here, we want to set up a network. How we can do it? We can also represent, it's the same graph, basically. No, this one is different. But we can represent everything with a graph, and you don't necessarily have latitude and longitude attached to this information. The rivers, this one have latitude and longitude. We have some functionality that works for flow, with flow functions. So you can analyze the flow of the water in this river, which is the Nile. And this week, during the code sprint, we will work in 3.5, and soon on September 2023, September this year, November probably, we will have a version 3.6. Not so soon, we will have a version 4.0. Might happen on 24, might happen on 25. Originally, I was planning to do it for 23, but it's getting too big, and we are doing some improvements, standardization, and let's talk about our functions and what we want to achieve. So we have several classifications: official, proposed, and experimental functions. Official functions normally don't change. But on 3.5, PGR Dijkstra, which is our main function, the easiest one, the first one that people learn, it's the first one that we teach in the workshop, is changing, has changed already. Proposed they're ready. We feel that they do not have bugs, and in the next major release, they might or they might not become official. And experimental, it's normally are functions that were added by other contributors that need some refinement and that need code cleanup, that need more tests, because I'm a test freak, so we need to test a lot to become proposed, and from proposed to become official, okay? So we have those classifications. So the official ones are the more stable ones. But as I mentioned, PGR Dijkstra, which is an official one, is changing on 3.5. And we have for each function many overloads. One-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, many-to-many, and combinations. It's from one source, from one departure point to one destination, and so on. Okay, so the same function with many overloads, you can do many queries with many-to-many, for example. So we have many families, all pairs, A-star, bidirectional A-star, Dijkstra, and families, flow, for flow, cross-call prim, topology, and reference. So we have them kind of grouped in families, and we want to standardize the input and the output. Okay, so I'm going to skip a little bit of other categories. Oh, we have the cost functions with PGR Dijkstra cost. PGR A-star, PGR A-star cost. So the suffix is adding the cost matrix, and so on. And we have the width points are all proposed. They haven't been moved up because I know they have an issue. There's an issue open about that. And I haven't got the time to fix that issue. they're usable, but I don't like that section of the code I wrote. And we have the via functions also. So Dijkstra via, everything ends with that category. So, as I mentioned, we are changing the code. And let's understand first the version that we're using of PG routing. If you run select version and library from PGR full version, you get two values. One is the SQL version, and the second value is the C++ code that is being used by that SQL version. So here, it's saying that the SQL that it's being used is 3.1.3, and the library is 3.6.0, which means that you can run anything with this SQL and with this library. When we make a new release of PG routing, we're not breaking the major. So your code will work. Your SQL code will work. You don't need to do anything. It will work. So with that combination of SQL and C++ code, we can do a select, and I'm choosing all the columns that come from PGR Dijkstra. So this function is 3.1. And we get the following columns: sequence, path sequence, node, edge cost, and aggregate cost. That will remain the same. It's working perfectly. But let's see what happens if I'm using, for example, 3.6.0 dev. Remember, this is for September or something, but you can try out 3.6 dev. It's in the develop branch of PG routing with the 3.6 C++ code. And we run the same query. We get these two additional columns that are start VID and end VID. The thing is that the many-to-many function and the combinations ones have all these columns, but the one-to-one does not have a start bit and end bit, because in theory, the person that is coding is saying, well, I'm going from vertex 1 to vertex 3. I'm remembering it. But in reality, it's not happening, so we're returning that column now. So to prepare for the migration, we recommend not to use the select star and use the exact names of the columns. And this query, as it is, will run with both versions of the SQL code in combination with the C++ code. We have new topology functions, and we are going to be deprecating these ones. I think we're going to be doing that very soon. It's going to be part of 3.6. And actually, since version 3.3.2, we're not using any of these functions in the documentation, except on the page of the documentation of the functions. But for the sample data, we're not using any of these functions. So they're, with the functions, the new ones, you can work them out. So basically, use everything. The new one, PGR extract vertices, save on a table, and then update source, update target, and then you have a topology, a working topology. So also this one is being deprecated, and you have to use different things depending on your objective. You can use connected components, this new function, or any of the PostGIS functions. And you have a migration guide that you can always check since we started making these changes. So there is a migration guide. And keep on routing. Thank you.
Can you open also this one? Any question? Don't be shy. No? Okay.
I'm clear as petrol.
Yeah, so you said we have to do some cleaning from OSM data to get into PG routing.
Okay, we have OSM to PG routing that imports, prepares a graph that is usable in PG routing. It's not necessarily cleaning, it's usable. But when you're thinking of a final application, you really need to put a little bit more effort because maybe the graph is disconnected, the area that you imported is smaller, and you need a larger area to import to make it connected, to really arrive from one place to another. But these, and the analysis functions like connected components, they can check, hey, how many disconnected components? Then I can see, oh, how can I fix the data so that the graph becomes connected? It can be a permanent fix, which means go to OSM and do a permanent fix because maybe there's a bridge missing. Or you can do a temporary fix. I just need to make up a path that is going to be expensive in terms of cost, but it's going to be the only one. So in the final API, there is something that I'm going to handle. Hey, you need to figure out how to go from here to here. But yeah.
I have a question. You say that you can make network without geometry.
Yeah, well,
but
this is graphs, and graphs do not have geometries.
But PG routing is based on PostGIS or not?
Okay. That the 90% of the time PG routing is used with geometries is another matter, but graph algorithms do not care about geometries. Actually, many geometry algorithms use graph algorithms to solve those problems. But a graph doesn't have a geometry. Mm-hmm.
Any other question from the... Okay, so thanks a lot, Vicky.
Thank you.
See you around.
And enjoy FOSS4G.
I don't mind. I just was thinking about maybe if the battery is low then.
Ah, okay. Yeah, the other one.
Yeah, from the speaker. Because she, at the end, maybe it was waiting for...
Yeah, I heard that. Test. Test. Nee. Nee.
Sure. Good.
Okay, you will. Okay.
Without seeing the presentation, I have probably start. So maybe we wait 1 minute more. Yeah, because some people are coming.
Sure.
Yeah. That's okay. And also people are moving from the room to others. So if they finish a little bit later from one room, it's quite. Okay, so let's start with the second speaker. He's Felix Kunde, and he will show and tell us why we should update Postgres and PostGIS every time that is releasing new version. So, thanks.
Thanks, Luca. Hi, everybody. How's it going? Yeah, I'm here to talk about upgrading your Postgres, and not only Postgres will thank you, but also PostJS. So I hope that all of you here are also PostGIS users, so that the stuff that I'm talking about is a bit technical at times, so that you can follow. Yeah. So yeah, I work as a database engineer at Zalando. It's Europe's, I would say, a leading online fashion e-commerce platform. We are in 25 markets in Europe, not yet in Kosovo, but maybe one day it will come. So we already reached like Croatia, Slovenia, and Romania. So And at Zalando, I'm part of the database team, the Postgres as a service team, and we manage around like 3,000 database clusters on top of Kubernetes. So 2 years ago at FOSS4G, I've also given a talk about like how we do this. And today this will mostly focus about upgrading Postgres, because as you can imagine, with like 3,000 separate database clusters, it would be a nightmare as a database administrator if you would not have like great automation in place. So my team came up with a tool called Patroni. I don't know if you've heard about Patroni. It's an open source solution for Postgres to provide you with high availability, and it's becoming now the sort of like de facto standard in the industry. So if you want to go high available with Postgres, you will probably do this with Patroni. And we also came up with this Postgres operator tool, which is like a small controller in Kubernetes, which allows you to provide like database as a service tooling for multiple teams. So for example, at Zalando, if you're an engineer and you want to create a new database, you don't have to talk to me. You just write a short manifest file, submit this to Kubernetes, and then everything spins up automatically for you. In 1 minute, you have a database, backups, and everything. And you can change it later on. You can also remove it on your own. And you can also upgrade it on your own by just changing the major version. And this talk will now tell you why you should do this every once in a while. I would say maybe at least once a year. So I was thinking about doing a short question game, but I don't want to dispose anybody here if you're still using Postgres 10, but just be alarmed. Unfortunately, this is not like, it's a PDF, so the siren is not spinning, but luckily we have some wind, so it's a bit dramatic at least. So Postgres 10 is end of life since last November. And Postgres 11, if you're still using it, will be end of life this November. And what does it mean is, it's open source software, but it doesn't get any more updates. The developers are concentrating on the new releases and creating and developing the future releases. And so so this is not supported anymore, and in November Postgres 11 will also not be supported. So if you are using PostJS, so then I hope at least you will be on Postgres 12. So I think the stretched text still looks okay. I will quickly go over the last releases over the last years, so that to convince you more to do an upgrade. So I hope that you are at least using Postgres 12, because this was the version that made it possible for PostJS to use parallel queries out of the box. So when you install PostJS and you write some queries, they can be parallelized by the planner of PostgreSQL with Postgres 12. Also the deserialization of geometries got a lot more efficient with Postgres 12, because there was an API to allow to do a quick bounding box check before doing the serialization from the disk. And another big feature was reindex concurrently. You will see on the next slides why this is an important feature also. Down here, you see these nice little signs here. Of course, with every new release, there can also be some breaking changes. And before you just run blindly into an upgrade, you should first check if there are some breaking changes, if they affect your code or your application code. And you have to first find some detours for this. So that's also something you have to make sure every time you do an upgrade. Usually there are not many breaking changes, but it can be like there's this one feature that you have used before and now they dropped it in Postgres, so you have to be aware. Okay, so Postgres 13. This was the big release for the B-tree indexes. So of course we are here at the spatial conference. We have a lot of spatial data in our Postgres database, but I would still think that you still have more B-tree indexes to do search on like numeric and text columns. So B-tree indexes got smaller and faster with this release. So that means after the upgrade, you have to re-index all your B-trees, or like all your databases would also be good. So this is also something that you would have to do sometimes with the spatial indexes, that you just have to re-index all your spatial indexes, because the PostGIS developers thought about, okay, now we have come up with a new plan for the gist index, for example, a new storage method. And so that's why re-index concurrently from Postgres 12 was such an important addition. So of course, with every Postgres release, I mean, they always tell you like it's faster now, it's improved in so many ways. There are usually some core features which got like here parallel support. In this case, it was vacuum for indexes. And in case you're using multi-column indexes, OSM people looking at you, maybe. This also now has incremental sort support in Postgres 13. Okay, coming to 14. 14 was quite important for us because we have, like in production, we automatically always have a high available setup with one primary instance and one replica, at least one replica. And in the past, it could happen that if you overload your primary with a lot of writes, that your replicas start lagging behind and behind, so more and more. And with this release, now the recovery speed was greatly improved. So this was not more likely to happen in the future. That scenario where your primary gets overloaded and your replicas cannot follow. If you're a fan of using materialized views, 14 also had a good improvement here that you can refresh them in parallel. And also the Postgres people created a new method for gist indexes to build them faster. So, and of course, PostGIS developers jumped straight at it and said, okay, now because it's usually a big pain point for PostGIS that building spatial indexes takes so long. And with this new method, it became like, I don't know, 8 times faster or something. But unfortunately, the query speed was worse after that. So building was faster, query speed was slower, unfortunately. So this was fixed with Postgres 15. So if you now install PostGIS on Postgres 15, gist indexes will be able to build faster. Not as fast as with 14, but yeah, they had to fix some things that the query speed remains the same. Yeah, there was also some improvements for window functions. So if you're looking at the new features that will come in the next PostGIS version, it has some very cool, neat features for coverages, which are window functions. So I hope this will also benefit from this improvement for sorting speed of window functions. And yeah, and if you have backups, there's also now a server-side compression for backups, which makes this faster. Yeah, and I think I should also note this one here. So I know that when you're new to Postgres and PostGIS, you happily start your server and start creating stuff in the public schema in Postgres. This will not be possible any longer in Postgres 15. So there is now, like, they have removed this privilege from the public role, so you cannot go there and just create stuff in the public schema. You have to grant the privilege to do so. So be aware if you have some migration scripts that are relying on this functionality that it was possible. Okay, so a quick glimpse into the future. Postgres 16 will probably be released this autumn. So every autumn there's usually the Postgres release. So one of the key features that I picked out was like some great improvements for logical replication. But I don't know if you are using logical replication, probably not. And but the second item here, that the copy command got around like 300% faster, and I think this is like a great news for everybody who is like usually doing bulk imports of spatial data into Postgres. But yeah, my favorite feature, if you ask me, is the first one. If you have like your SQL where you have a subquery in your from block, you don't need an alias anymore. I really love it, but I don't know about you, but it's my favorite feature. Okay, so this was, of course, I was only scratching the surface. So I was picking out stuff that I thought you find interesting for the last releases. There's a great feature matrix on the Postgres homepage where you can, if you scroll down, there are loads of features that they list here, and then they show you like which version supports which feature. And I think this, if you scroll and look at this, it makes it even more convincing for you to run an upgrade. So there's here also the PostGIS support matrix to see is like the new Postgres version supporting which Postgres version, and you see here like the newest PostGIS, will not support Postgres 11. So if you're still on 11, want to use the new functions in PostGIS, think about upgrading. You see it's a sliding window, so it's, yeah, probably the next PostGIS will not support 12 anymore. Okay, and now to the question, how have we automized the Postgres upgrades? How to do this? What are the single steps that you have to do? There are basically 3 ways to do a Postgres upgrade. So one is the hard upgrade, the soft upgrade, and you can also do this with logical replication. So hard upgrade means you dump all your data into a file and then you restore it in a separate server. Like if you think about like database downtime, server downtime, that might sound a bit stupid, but if downtime isn't an issue, then it's still a viable approach. I mean, I did major version upgrades 10 years ago like this. Because I don't want to fiddle around with like creating symlinks and running into errors with the soft upgrade, I just dumped everything with dump all and then restored it into a new server. So you can still do this. And whenever maybe the internal storage format of PostGIS will change, maybe then this is the only way you could do this. So between PostGIS 1 and 2, you had to do this because they changed the internal format. They did it too between 2 and 3, but it was still possible to do the soft upgrade, so fortunately. So in this talk, I will focus on the soft upgrade, because there you just install everything like on one server, and then you have just one tool to upgrade everything, upgrade all the files, and it usually runs in like a few seconds, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then everything is upgraded. So that's, of course, in terms of downtime, way better than doing the hard upgrade. Yeah, replication is probably provides you the least downtime, but it also has some constraints when it comes to the setup of logical replication. Like sequences, I think, are not supported. You have to copy them manually. But maybe this will also become more convenient in the future. Okay, so for the soft update, the quick summary looks like this. So you install all the new Postgres version, the new PostGIS version, and then you run this pg upgrade command with the link option. You can specify here the old data directory, your new data directory, old bin directory, a new binary directory. And when this is done, in your database, you run this command alt extension PostGIS upgrade, or if you have more PostGIS, if you are using more PostGIS extensions, you can use select PostGIS extensions upgrade. And you have to do this now for every database where you have PostGIS installed. So it's not like when you run pg upgrade, automatically you are using the new PostGIS. So it's still an extra step you have to do for your extensions, not only PostGIS, also other extensions. So for the installation part, you install the new Postgres version, the new PostGIS, which is built against that Postgres version, and then also this scripts package, at least for the Linux distribution. And then your setup is fine. If you're still on PostGIS 2, I don't know, is there anybody still using PostGIS 2 here in this audience? No. Okay, then we can skip that part, because there you had to do some tricks with like symlinks and so on, but fortunately this is not necessary anymore, because now the new PostGIS 3 is only having the major version in the library name, so not the minor version. Because yeah, previously it was usually a bit tricky to do these upgrades. And if you're using sfseagull and you're still on versions 3 or older, you also had to like drop that extension because the library was separated from the main PostGIS. Okay, so when you run pg upgrade with this link option, why it's so great? Because it's creating only hard links between your pg data directories. There's no copying of data, so if you would not use link, then all the data would be copied from one data directory to another. And this is what, of course, require that you have the same amount of free disk space, that your database is big. So if you're using link, only links are used. And also one thing that is really great is that the downtime which occurs during the upgrade does not depend on the database size. So if your database cluster is 1 gigabyte big or 1 terabyte big, the downtime can be the same. It only depends on the number of objects in your database, not like the data, but tables, types, functions, and whatsoever. So if your database has 1 million schemas, then the upgrade will take longer, but it doesn't depending on the data size. Okay, I have to speak a bit louder. So what do you have to do when you want to automate this PG upgrade process? So here are I'm listing now all the steps that our script is doing. So first, of course, you could only run the upgrade if your cluster is healthy. If you have replicas, you have to check if they're streaming and not lagging behind. Are there not any bulk imports running at the time you want to do the upgrade? I mean, this sounds obvious, but still. And yeah, then on the same server, you create a new PG data directory within a DB. Make sure that you are using the current configuration. Like, don't just install the new Postgres with default shared buffers and workmem and so ever. So you could just copy these values from your current configuration. Of course, you still have to use some paths that are pointing to the new directory, data directory. You cannot use the same path there. And you also have to check for incompatible extensions. So don't just, like, when Postgres is released, yay, I can go do the upgrade. You have to, of course, make sure that the new Postgres is already there to support this new Postgres version, or maybe if you have another extension like timescale, sometimes you have to wait a bit longer until this extension is also supporting the new Postgres version. And the last point here is you can also run PG upgrade check. This is just a dry run. It will only tell you, okay, upgrade is possible or not. That's it. So you can run this and it will not change anything. It will just tell you if upgrade would be possible or not. Okay, then for the upgrade, there could still be, you should check in your code if you have some functions that are using maybe stuff in Postgres which has changed. So then if you put this all into a script, you should remove this stuff and then add this after the upgrade. And yeah, when you go into the upgrade, you have to, of course, stop your Postgres servers. You call PG upgrade link. And if this fails, you have, of course, to undo all the stuff that you have maybe done in point 1 or on the previous page. If you have dropped already some things, you have to re-add them after a failed PG upgrade link command. If PG upgrade link succeeds, then it's the point of no return. So if you then have upgraded and you realize, oh shit, the performance is pretty bad and things fall apart and I want to go back to the previous major version, it's not possible anymore with your server. It's only possible if you restore from a backup. So if you want to be really secure, you should have done a base backup before you run the upgrade, and then you can still restore from this backup, and then you're back on your old major version. But there is no functionality in Postgres that say PG downgrade or something. It's not there. Okay, so when the PG upgrade is finished, you can rename your data directory, because you remember there are 2 data directories on your server. You have to adjust the Postgres config so that all the paths are correct and pointing to the right libraries. And in case you have replicas, you can also upgrade your replica servers just by using rsync. Maybe there are different ways, but we found rsync to be the most convenient for us to upgrade replicas. And it's also like a matter of seconds, because it's just the files that have to be updated. And yeah, and last but not least, I mentioned all the stuff that you might have to drop because of some breaking changes. This you have to re-add in your script. Okay, and last but not least, the cleanup. So everything is done, upgraded, your cluster is upgraded, yay. You should run, you should update the table statistics. So there's this vacuum DB tool that you can run. And you can remove your old PG data directory and initialize a new base backup. So this was now very, very short. And you can find here behind these links, or if you just search in the internet, then you will also find greatly detailed descriptions of how to upgrade Postgres. Also like a huge fleet of Postgres clusters. Okay, so how is the user experience at Zalando? How do teams upgrade their Postgres clusters? So as I said, they only have to update one number in a manifest file. So here you can see there is this. This is what our teams have to do when they want to create a new database cluster. Just a few lines, and then here in the version field, they just changed 14 to 15, and then yeah, we have this Kubernetes operator which then rotates all the pods and kicks in this upgrade script and upgrades the cluster. So we can also configure this globally. We could say now all the databases that are still on 12 or older should be upgraded to version 15, for example. That's something we could also do. We're not doing this in production, but it's something we could configure with our tool. Okay, and the last slide. So the conclusion. We found, so you know, before we had this automatic major version upgrade, we had to do this manually. We had to agree with the teams for a matching time slot to do the upgrade, and we had to like stopping the service, running the upgrade script. This was all manual stuff that we had to do, and this led to like teams delaying the major version upgrade. Sometimes when teams approach us and thinking like, oh, my database performance is really bad, and we are looking like, oh, you're still using Postgres 9.6 or 10, then we usually recommend them to upgrade, but that's, if it's not very optimized, it's a topic that teams like to delay in their backlog. So, yeah, but after this optimization, now we see like teams are really adopting it more, embracing it more, and upgrading now more regularly, more frequently. Like once a year they run the upgrade because they want to use the new features. And of course, when there is a new Postgres version, it's not that like my team makes it available for everybody immediately. We usually wait 1 or 2 minor releases before we say to the teams, okay, you can now go with this in production. But yeah, when there's a new release, we usually, in our test environment, it's already there immediately, but yeah, in production, we usually wait a few minor releases. And this is also something that if you have maybe more critical databases, also something that you should do. Because still, I mean, Postgres is pretty robust, but it can be that maybe, yeah, there are some bugs, some performance degradations that are found, and then, yeah, you don't want to run into this. But you could run into this if you test. So everything that I have explained here, you should always test this. So when you upgrade your database cluster, first in a test environment, make this one run with PG upgrade, see if everything is compatible, the performance is good after that, and then you can apply this for your production database. So never forget testing. Okay, and now I'm happy to take some questions.
So, any question?
Thank you very much for the talk. I was very happy that you said in the end that we just need to dump the version on the manifest, so it's very good. And I wanted to ask you, where do you announce when we can dump the version number in the manifest? So when will you do that? You know what I mean? Like, make it a higher version. Like, when does Zalando allow their production to go or another higher version? Do you? 2 minor releases? It's okay. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Some other question? So I have a question. So you said that everything is automated, right? And you have some script inside Docker images or?
Yeah, now the link is not fully visible, but here, this is the Docker image that we use. It's Zalando/Spilo. It also supports now ARM. So, and yeah, this is what you can use. So it includes multiple Postgres versions, multiple PostJS versions, like the latest minor releases, and it has the script. So you can also look into the script, how we have done this, and yeah, try it out on your own.
more question?
So, another from my side. Can you tell something more about Patroni? Because I don't know.
Yeah, Patroni originated, I think, 8 years ago from another CoreAS project from Governor, and Patroni does this automatic failover and leader election. So if you see a run primary goes down, Patroni elects a replica to become the new primary. This is what Patroni does.
No more?
I just have one question. Are you the author of the drawings of the blue elephant? Because they are cute.
They are from a previous colleague of ours. Yeah, Kolja, I think is his first name. But yeah, I also adore them.
Okay, thank you.
And they are not hand drawn; they are made on the computer. That's even more fascinating.
Okay, so let's finish, and now there will be the keynote speaker. It will start in 5 minutes or something like that.
Sorry?
We'll do a small test to the slides. We'll do a small test, 2 minutes.
I don't think, are you working this?
No? But you want to try your slides?
Yeah.
Let's do, we have some time.
Yeah. Go.
We
So
have
how are we gonna advance the?
Do you want to grab it like that, or do you want it in?
You can leave it in there. I don't think I'm gonna move. See, the thing is gonna be getting it back.
Try it for a second. What happens? With right click.
Left click.
Yeah, right click. Yeah. Loads. And then what happens is try again.
I don't want to do it now. You're gonna ruin the.
You don't want to ruin the surprise.
I'm sort of joking. Did we say hit down here?
Yeah. If you move it down there, you don't need to move the mouse. It will just move. Okay, it should be fine then.
How do I stop it?
Stop it. Yeah. Just click somewhere everywhere. And then you
So
see where the
again,
mouse is?
Yeah. Can you get rid of that? That's a setting.
Which one?
That ribbon at the bottom is a setting.
Yeah, but you need that to see how to move the mouse.
No. Like, here, I'll show you. When I do this, see this thing? You could turn this off. You could turn that off.
You want to turn
You see the ribbon? That-
display.
No, this right here. That can be that can go away. Yo, I'll wait, Marco. I'll wait. it gone?
No,
Oh.
they don't know how to use Prezi. So
No,
I
that's
will try
okay.
one last time.
That's all right. I didn't know it was. I thought it was a. No, they can get their knees up. Okay, am I on? Mine's on. Yours isn't on. Or it's out of charge. I might like that one. I won't move. I'll just stay here. I'll just stay here. Can you hear me? Is it really loud? I could sing a song.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, you should speak louder, I think.
I should?
Yeah, well, let's try. There's some noise, we are outdoors.
I'm a very loud talker. Okay, good.
Hello. How was the day? Oh, if you enjoyed the talks, let's make a big applause for all the speakers. Good. Great, so we are almost there. We have the last talk of the day, and it will be a keynote. It's my pleasure to introduce Bonnie McLean. She's a geospatial analyst, a human geographer, social anthropologist. What an interesting mix. You may have heard about Bonnie as the author of some cool GIS books on geospatial analysis with Python, SQL, and more. So I'm happy to give the floor to Bonnie for the keynote. Hope you will not freeze in the meantime, so please try to resist. It's just something more than half an hour, and then we will enjoy the party. Thank you. Bonnie, the floor is yours.
I like to get all the clapping out of the way at first so that I don't feel any pressure. So we all can hear me. I'm going to start running this. I have some help because, of course, I didn't heed the warning, don't have too many videos and all that stuff. I thought, I'm going all in. And you're coming with me, so. Let's see. Now, I like to have something going on in the background when I talk about myself because I didn't want my big head just hanging on the screen. And this is something that we all can speak to. And I like to introduce myself as Bonnie McLean, and I am biased. I'd like to say that to remind everybody that we're all biased. The data can be as raw as you can imagine it. It's all biased. We're human, biased. The artificial intelligence, all of that is biased. But I think our advantage is that we bring other resources to the conversation. We can talk about the water systems in the areas we're looking at. We can look at the forest. We can look at the wildlife. We can drill down into cities and oceans and how we build and how we use industry to our advantage and our disadvantage. We can see what we're doing to the earth that leaves a scar, things that maybe we can intervene later and try to go back, but we have the advantage of maybe having a passion, but also having some scientific evidence to put forward to hopefully help the world in a different sort of a way. And that's kind of what I bring to you with this kind of cinematic start to what I want to spend maybe 30, 40 minutes kind of talking, with you. I talk really fast, so we might be done sooner. But, what I like about this is when you tell a story, it's not just about the numbers. You're bringing context to the stage. And you have a distinct advantage to do that. And as a recovering medical writer, there's not really a narrative voice in a gallbladder, but there is a narrative voice when we bring data to the conversation. And so what I'm going to talk to you, this isn't like a single train of thought. And if you know me, I'm not really capable of single trains of thought. But, I kind of travel the world talking about individual stories with sort of different topics around, social anthropology, culture, climate. And so what I did is I kind of created some little vignettes that I kind of wanted to bring those things on board for you so you can experience them. And then, I'll share the link with you. And if you want to drill down into any of the topics, I did build in some hyperlinks that will lead to more information. So don't feel like you're being shortchanged if we just zoom over something. There's a deeper exploration. And I like to think about expanding our humanity with data stories, because it's the stories that matter. The stories are what, you know, if you want to be a leader in any industry or a leader in your job, wherever you are, you know, on the earth, you lead by kind of influencing change, getting that emotion going in somebody that's going to influence how they're going to move forward. And I think we're uniquely able to do that with geospatial. Now, this is someone that, this is a TED Talk. The link is in the thing. If you ask for the slides, I'll send them to you. Now, this was a new piece of information. Stephen DeBerry did this really powerful TED Talk where he posed this question, because a lot of the work I do is looking at vulnerable cities and what makes them vulnerable and what makes other cities just work fine. So we go in and we look at different metrics, and what we don't measure, we can't change. We all probably are familiar with that saying. And he made this observation. He's like, have you ever noticed that the east side of places are usually where we put, where the division is, where we have, you know, a disparity by design. Somehow, this is how it happens. And I was thinking to myself, I'm thinking, well, you know, the urban centers I was familiar with, I was like, well, yeah, but nature isn't, you know, racist, and nature isn't making these decisions. This is just how the world works. And if you think about looking at the North Pole and the globe going counterclockwise, think about where the wind goes. You know, and so if there's any pollution or anything in the environment or any toxins, you could kind of see. And he's not just theorizing this with like, well, this makes sense. Look at the wind. I'm going to show you. He's got some math behind it, which if you're like me, that makes it all truth. But, you know, in America, we see this in a lot of our cities, many of our cities. If anyone here is from the States, which I'm sure you are, I just haven't met you. But we can think of Detroit, we can think of Chicago, we can think of all of our cities and think, most of them, not all, and I'll feature one that doesn't follow that, but it kind of makes sense. And then there's some that we see all around the world, like if you look at East London, the east side of Paris, Jerusalem, Vancouver, you can see some of those patterns. And so in 2016, I think, there was this story of the East Side Story. And they went in and they put math behind it. And they did a statistical analysis because they really could pick up smokestacks using, you know, satellite data. And they could, so they did all these mathematical figures here. And the paper to this is also available. But the dominant logic that industrial area was to put here, we're going to put the railroad here, the highways are going to go here, these buildings are going to go here. So, you know, the dominant logic of the industrial area was it was in line with exactly what we're talking about here, persistent neighborhood sorting. And this is back in the 1800s where this original study was done. And if you look here, the way they measured it, they have all the math is here, and it all checks out. But they're also, look at A and look at B. So you look at where the intensity of the pollution is. And they, you know, they created gradients, and they had grids, and they measured everything. They used Gaussian kernels. And, but they could show you the share of low-skilled workers, where they lived in relation to the pollution. So, you know, sometimes in the US and, you know, other places, there's disparity by design, there's otherism, there's things like that. And we're going to explore some good news about some changes that are being made to ameliorate some of these. But, you know, before we do that, I wanted to show you, you know, the fossil fuel pollution. So what you're looking at here is the Americas. And what you see at the top, you know, that's the carbon. That's the fossil fuel. The green is the good guys. And the red is kind of like any type of fire or burning or anything like that. But the good news is, look at the green. You know, the green kind of flashing on is a sink for all of the carbon. And I wanted to show Asia and Australia as well, because, you know, it's just really interesting to watch, you know, the whirling of the wind and how the earth, you know, how we can actually heal ourselves. Like, there's all possibility. It's not all going to be this chemical storm of, you know, fossil fuel, but I really like showing how the land and the ocean act as a sink. And this is the last one, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And you'll have the links, so you'll be able to look and like observe different places. But, oh, I didn't mention, this was modeled by NASA. So NASA modeled these based on the pollution and the carbon data that they have. And this just follows suit, right? You expected to see something like this. No, but have you all seen or heard of the body works, these plasticine cadavers that are posed? And I like to use this when I'm talking about kind of perception and what we see when we look at things. And this is kind of a representation of my husband and I. No, this is me and my husband playing cards. No, we were at one of these museums, and a man and his little tiny son, they come up to a seat. I think they were playing chess. The figures that we were looking at were playing chess. And of course, they were all fully, dissected, and the plasticine is what makes them not rot. And the little boy looks at the figures and he says, Daddy, that man ain't got no. Now, what would you think? Can anyone think of what would you think a little boy would say when he sees this? Like, you could think, skin, he doesn't have a face. The little boy says, he ain't got no shoes. And I was trying to think to myself, like, well, that's the least of his worries. But, I mean, it just reminds you, like, what is in your brain and what's triggering for you is very unique and individual to you. And, I stumbled upon an exhibit that Mimi did in DC. And the relevance here is she's a very talented artist. And this is just one thing that she has. She talks about the library of missing data sets. And she talks about the word missing as being normative. Because if something is missing, then we expect it to be there, but it's not. And so that's problematic. And so maybe we've left some of these spaces blank because we have hidden social biases and we have some indifferences. Or sometimes we just don't think about creating a data question that's very well formulated, that can bring more data into the conversation, that can kind of balance out some of those biases that we're all built with. And the solution to that, we can't do anything about it. We can just be transparent, and we can be as effortful as we can in making sure we're bringing a lot of data to our questions. And I transitioned from working in healthcare analytics and working in medicine because I realized they don't really abide by first principles. We're not trying to get down to the root of why is everybody so sick? We just kind of work in our own little bubble. And I was talking with, maybe it was Vicki, but we were talking about how, if the GDP of your country is 18% from healthcare, you're not really motivated to make everybody shiny and bright and healthy in the morning because you just collapsed your economy. And the work that I was asked to do was always to pivot information by race. So I was, as an analyst, whatever data we were getting from clinical trials, clinical research, we created these buckets. And I realized through my own analysis and my background in genetics that there's more intra-race variability than there is inter-race. So, I'm biracial. And when I got this, I thought this was hysterical because, in my whole life, my race was binary. When I was growing up, are you black or white? Are you black or white? And then, we kind of evolved a little, and we're like, look at her, she's multiracial, But there still was no descriptor. And then when I ran the 23andMe, and I found out that, my gosh, I'm 42% Northwestern European, and then, West African. This kind of shows you how just looking at race doesn't tell you anything about anyone. It's a very poor biologic proxy for anything in medicine, and it's also just a social construct that we can't really move forward with. And so we need other things to be part of the conversation, and that's where I came across looking at the built infrastructure. So my focus has been on cities, on what makes them vulnerable. And these are things that so I'm going to show you a couple tools that are built in here that we can look at that can give you some information that can talk about the DNA or the makeup of a city. I like to call it a metabolism of a city because it is all energy. And so what I do when I create presentations or stories is, the news. I just look at the newspaper or what's coming up in the news. And this was kind of an interesting story to follow because there was a viaduct built in Syracuse along the 81. And when it was built, it literally divided a community. It took the 15th ward and made it the poorest area in Syracuse just by fact of where the division occurred. And so now they've come together and they're, it's taken a while, but there is motivation and intention to just tear it down. And this is just a little bit of, so I wanted to just kind of first, is everyone familiar sort of with redlining? I'll take a second just to explain, but what happened in the 1930s, there was this housing shortage. So we didn't have enough housing, and we wanted more housing. So we thought, you know what we're going to do? We're going to build these housing neighborhoods, and we're going to fill them up with people, and won't life be great and grand? And so what they did at that point is that's where mortgages started being prevalent. Before that, you could put like $5,000. This is in the US. You could put down $5,000 on a house, and you had about, maybe 10 years or so to pay it off, and you were good. But then when they started building this huge, amount of homes, the banks got involved, and the Federal Housing Authority in the US was like, well, if we're going to fund these loans, we got to kind of come out and see what our investment looks like, and we're going to decide the risk probability of lending certain groups of people money. So what they did is they went and and I'll show you some of the terms they use, but they went to this Syracuse and they would, look. And if they saw a lot of migrants, if they saw immigrants, did I do that? Oh, you did that. Oh, we're ready. So what they did is they gave it a score. So green's great. Green, you get all the money you want. Here's more money that you didn't even ask for. And then are you doing that? Oh, just wait a second. Sorry. So the yellow neighborhoods were kind of like, cautious, red, blue. You can't see, let me see if I can get this. I might be able to hit this. Let me see. So yeah, if I go over here and I pick, so if you pick an area, I don't know if I'm doing it or you doing it, but we'll just take it from here. So what this is here, so this is the redlining from the 1930s. So I don't expect you to be familiar with Syracuse, but what you can kind of tell is that, the communities that were redlined were the ones that didn't get the money. And if you were probably in a yellow area, you probably didn't get any money either. And if you're blue, you got a little bit of money. But people say, well, Bonnie, that was like 100 years ago. So what difference does that make? Well, what you can do is you can look today and map the same communities. And some of the yellow communities go red, and also some of the red communities go green. That's how you measure change. But what's interesting here in the middle, what we look at is the social vulnerability index. So these populations from before, how have they persisted and how have they evolved over all this time? And you can see the social vulnerability index in this community that you see on the far right is, it's pretty high, right? And then you could look at the percent minority, you can look at life expectancy. All of these measures are off. They haven't caught up to their counterparts on the left that, got home loans or got homes. And if you think about it, that's how, at least in the US, that's how we exchange, we leave wealth for the next generation. It's in our homes. So if you have generation after generation that hasn't had transfer of wealth, you can kind of imagine what the future looks like. Oh, you need to do, if you don't mind. Oh no, you're taking us on a tour. There we go. I can click through this now. So this is really interesting to look at because you can look at different communities. And then I wanted to make sure we were all up to speed on our geospatial knowledge. So this is my geospatial 101 class for y'all, raster vector. I just think this thing's funny, so I always stick it in there. Because now we're going to start looking, and these are just really quick maps that I did. Like whenever I want to look at an area really fast, I usually just hop into QGIS and I like pull in OpenStreetMap stuff and I look around and I just want to see what's going on depending on my question. What I was trying to look at here, so financial decisions become self-fulfilling. Because if you have property taxes that are assessed on homeowners and you don't have a lot of homeowners in your area, in your census tract, in your wherever, then you don't have the investment into your school systems, you don't have the investment into your, a lot of investment doesn't happen. So you're creating these communities almost intentionally. And what you see over here, well, there's a better slide to show it, but so you can see the red, this is the rendering of the redlining. And what you see here is the viaduct over, in where that's impacting these communities, and there's actually a better way to see it on the next slide. Because you're looking at land use here, and you're also looking at the, like to the left and to the right of the line that drops down the middle, that's the 81 highway. And this is how it showed up historically. You can see the viaduct splitting the city. And you also see on the near part of the city, you can see where there's businesses, there's buildings, there's all kinds of opportunity, and things are pretty level and flat on the far side. And there's also, I think I can point to it without messing everything up, there's like wastewater treatment plants. The buildings that were put on the side of the 15th Ward, where the poverty and the increased asthma and all these other measures that we were looking at to look at vital communities, has persisted. But what's really interesting is people finally have stepped up and they've had enough, and they're saying, we're going to pull that thing down and we're going to make living more equitable. And another story that was sent to me was about Charlotte. What's really interesting about this is this community was called Biddlesville, and by some irony, my dad was from Biddlesville, North Carolina, and I went there when he had Alzheimer's to make him a picture book of the community. And it was just plight. It didn't fare well. But now the community has come together and have said, we want our community back. So what they've done here is, there's the green is this area called Dilworth Myers Park. Everything's great there. And you see, this doesn't follow that east thing, because if you look at the density of the roads, so where all those highways and railroads come together, that's where the despaired communities, the marginalized communities live. And also in Charlotte, you can look at the flight path of a major airport, and it goes over where the orange is, and where the utility lines are, and and they've had enough. They're now aware of this, and they're starting to make these changes that I'm showing you. So that's what it looks like now, and that's what their plan is. They've started an urban plan to make the city more livable and equitable. And this has been a project that I've been working on. I don't know, has anyone heard of Healthy and Sustainable Cities? It's this great, wait till you see this thing. It's Pythonic. It's built on like a Python platform, but there's a lot of ways to get to it. And what they've done is they've picked cities to kind of introduce you to how to use the tool. You can use it, I'm going to show it to you, but it's very interesting to look at. And what I did is I did some screenshots to show you what the output and what the data looks like. So what they've done, this is the article, the Lancet Global Health. I think I hyperlinked this, but the link is there. So what they decided to do is, well, what should we measure? Where should we start? And so the Lancet Global Health went in and looked at things like transportation and walkability of cities, and how much green space is available. And they created these 11 Ds that you might not be able to see from there, but they're like destination accessibility. How easy is it for you to get from point A to point B? What does the employment look like? I was surprised that in Detroit, that we all think of as being solely the auto industry, if you go and measure their distribution of employment now, it's quite diverse. And it just reads down there like diversity, desirability, density, all those local urban things that those of you who work in urban planning are familiar with. So this is a software package that you basically download and you can use it. I use it in Docker just because I use it in a training and a teaching environment. So I want it to be sort of like self-contained and people not like, well, I use this and I use Linux and I use Windows. So, you know, I use it in a Docker environment. But it is amazing. And this is an output. This is generated by the code that you run. I think I did a little code sample. Because how it works, and I don't want to spend too much time, but right now it's programmed with like population density that you pick. So you find your boundary file, you find your population density. We have links to transportation metrics, so if you want to see how easy it is to get across your city, you have access to that. So green spaces, so all these measures, and you can customize them based on your personal project. But this is what your data outputs, this beautiful graphic. This way you can look at it and say, hey, look, we're doing okay with public transport, but you know what? We need to get more green space. Or, you know, you get a reading of where each community is, and the sweet spot, too, is that you can compare it to other communities. So this is just a Docker environment. I don't think I need to show that to anyone here, but you just run it. You can run it in terminal. You can run it inside Docker, inside their terminal. I've done it in Jupyter Hub. And they also have like a GUI, you know, you don't really have to do anything, but what I like about that, having the GUI, is that it takes a minute to get your data set up in the way that the program can read it. But it's just YAML files, and they give you one that works, and then you just have to, you know, say prayers and vespers over the one that you tried to make and hope it'll work too. But so this is just how it runs. I mean, I just ran this in a terminal, and it just builds out the region, the indicators, and all of this stuff. And you can go in and customize it a little bit with Python as well. And now, this is not anything to do with that, but this is how I used to have to do it before. And I threw everything at this thing so I didn't have to make 5 million slides. I wouldn't normally have this all on the same slide, but if I want to look at Sao Paulo, which is what I was looking at, you know, I need to kind of look at a lot of things. I need to create like a buffer with a centroid. I need to like layer it, put a grid. I need to figure all of that out so I can do comparables. So, you know, this is just kind of what it might look like in QGIS, you know, with measuring like, you know, hospitals. I was looking at distance to hospitals and how it varied based on population density and how it varied based on income. And we have some indigenous populations in Brazil, so I was interested to see what their access looked like. And, you know, this goes from bad to worse, right? But the information here, the yellow that you see is mining communities. So I also wanted to see how close is the mining to different populations. You know, are any of these hallowed lands from the indigenous populations being, you know, taken over for mining? The red dots are just like clinics that I identified based on like hospital bed or how many patients they can see. So, you know how to pick the measures that you have. And then on the far right is just the global health, the population surges that we expect to see over the next 10 years and what that's going to make a city like Sao Paulo look like. But now if you run the code and you have your files set up, you know, according to the YAML file, you can look and compare cities across the world. They give you 25 cities initially that are kind of mapped out sort of to help you get started. You still have to find the data and set it up, but I mean, they really are pulling you through it. So you can look right now and see what areas in Sao Paulo, you know, have the highest walkability. And, you know, your data generates this. So these figures show up in the files that are configured. There's a file that's called figures, and when you run the code successfully, it's filled with these figures that were generated based, and you can modify them depending on how much, you know, Python you know or how, you know, dirty you want to get your hands. But if you're just looking for a comparative estimate, you can see open spaces, you can see, you know, public transport. So all of these measures are here, and then you can look at other cities and compare them. So I just thought this was really a neat, so basically all you're providing is the boundary, so you can do it by like districts, you know, maybe you have 76 districts, different areas of Brazil, different areas of any country, basically. And it also generates a report. Of course it does. So this contains all those figures and a little bit of the narrative information that you provide. And then you have something that can be, you know, a policy map for you if you work, you know, in a county or a community level and you want to bring this sort of information to the attention of people that can, you know, influence change. Because as we know, you know, data is mostly socially constructed. So it really serves us well to have some data behind it and some data visualization. And there's also, I don't know, how many of you are familiar with this journal? Any of you urban guys out here? I mean, this is like a rabbit hole in my office. And I pull things out when I'm going to be speaking, and usually it would be a whole workshop. But they do this mixed use indicator to measure life quality. And I like to see what different people are measuring. And I thought this was great. This lends itself really well to something like QGIS, because, you know, you can decide what it is you want to look at. This is dependent on your data question. Maybe you want to know residential. Maybe you want to know, you know, how many places of interest are within. I did this for a presentation I gave in Detroit where we were looking at US Census tracts, and we were trying to see where access to certain things were. And once we had all the code written and we knew what we were exploring, we just kind of swapped out different measures and different indicators. And this is what we would be able to see just by creating, you know, a buffer like a 400 meter, like a 15-minute walk buffer around the center of a census tract. And, you know, this is kind of something I was looking at because they have a forward program, and there were two problems here. The zoning is kind of the modern era of doing some redlining, because I could go into a community and I can say, well, the minimum size house you can build in this residential community is, you know, 5,000, you know, square feet. Well, that's going to make people that aren't looking for 5,000 square feet, they're not going to be able to live or build in those communities. So that's why you see some of those lingering, the buffers there. And what we were looking at, this is their forward thinking, where they're creating a lot of mixed use. Because as we've seen in the data, you know, mixed use brings crime down. Because, you know, I used to live in San Francisco, and like in the financial district, and on the weekend, I mean, nothing. There was nothing there. And that's where crime kind of bubbled up, because there weren't people walking the streets. Nothing was going to be back on and open till Monday. And now we're starting to see there's changes to be made with spatial and putting more multi-use things, you know, in certain areas. But, you know, this is a really easy way. You can do calculations and find out what's in these regions and where are you developing and what difference is it making. And this is just kind of like, you know, from above, looking at those same areas. And this final, you know, this tool is a plugin in QGIS. Anyone ever use this one? It's a plugin, and it's so easy to use. And it's looking at a different way to measure walkable access, because it's not just about linearity. If you have to walk around a parking lot, if you have to walk around a larger building, if there's lots of buildings, public and private, and you can't walk a certain way, these are some tools that help. Instead of looking at, you know, permeability, they're looking at the perimeters as well. And then they're looking at catchment. And this just kind of describes how they are looking at the permeability measures and how, you know, where it works really, really well, because there's different ways of looking at it. And the heterogeneous mix of blocks is usually the best in a community. And, you know, you can dive deeper into this if you want to have the link. And it really looks like this. Now, what you can see, if you see the little star over there, that's the center area. And then you'll see there's like a purple. Those are tracking, so they'll take like a dot, and then they'll show you all the different ways you can walk around this census tract or wherever you put your barrier. And you're able to determine, like here it's like 15,544 meters. You're able to walk within this community, you know, around these blocks and these buildings. And these measures can be compared to each other. So we do like the 400 because that's like the 15-minute walk. And then, you know, this eye-catching thing, this is the same sort of thing. Anything that's green, you know, has a smaller perimeter and it ends up being more walkable. And you have to kind of do both together because there's some things that can distort this. But it's a very simple plugin that you can just load right into QGIS. Now, you know, I showed you a lot of different ways to look at a community, to think about a community. And what I like to do at the end is share this. If you see it, raise your hand. Does anybody see what this is? I'll give you a hint in a minute, but usually somebody sees it. If I tell you what it is, tell me if you see it. It's a cow. It's actually called the Dellenbach cow. And I'm going to show you let me tell you what's important about it, and then I'll show you how to see it. Once you see this, you never forget it. And I like to think about that like geospatial. When someone shows me something geospatially, or they bring something into my community, or they make me aware of something, it stays with me forever. You will never see this image again and not know instantly what it is. It's just something they use in psychiatry. And you're all kind of failing right now. I'm joking. So, this, can you hear me if I just tell you? This is the nose. Like, think of this as the snout. This is an eye. That's an eye. The cow's like looking at you. Does anyone see that now? So, but now it's obviously a cow, now that you can see it. But this is an ear. Over there, it's an ear. And it's kind of a funny story because I use a lot of artwork when I'm working with physician audiences, because physician audiences don't want to know that they don't know something. So I used to put like a clinical paper up there, and I'd show them one of the graphs in the paper, and I'd say, I would hide the title, like, tell me what's going on here. And everybody would clam up because of that, like, awareness that, well, if I don't know, if I'm wrong. So I started putting pieces of art there because everyone's like, well, I don't get it either. And they would be very brave about what they saw and what they didn't see. So we started using this cow, and he ended up being on the Today Show with my friend who wrote the book, Amy Herman, about perception. And now I feel like, you know, since Gail King, you know, talked about it, more and more people have seen it before. And I always like to end on a positive note too, because this is how a city can be transformed. This is always a fan favorite because it's really funny. It's just showing you the city and like how you can clean it up, how you can make it more livable, how you can kind of offset some of the carbon, how you can, you know, we all know what urban heat islands are, places with asphalt and dark surfaces, you know, they become hotter. And so, you know, now we can introduce, you know, some modes of transportation that aren't going to generate pollution. We can put crosswalks that people can see, and we can protect. Sometimes we just throw up a crosswalk, but if someone's not protected, that's not doing its job. There's more to come. This is just a fun, it has like a little sound that's very cute. So if you get the link, it's very dramatic with the sound, so we don't have that on. But it's just showing you these simple little things that you almost think they're there until you notice that they're not. And what I always tell people with geospatial is it's not always just about what's there, it's also about what's not there. And it's sort of like that cow. You have to get used to seeing what's not there, what's there, and being aware of it. Any minute now we're gonna have some cafe revelers, there we are. And I just think it's a cute way, because when you talk about people's cities, they get kind of, they feel a certain way. And so if you end on something positive, occasionally, you know, people take some of this stuff away. I mean, trees are the easiest thing. And, you know, I'll end here and we'll start with questions in just a minute, just so to know who I am. You know, this is where you can find me if you want to have more conversations, if you want to continue a conversation, or if you'd like to get a copy of this is a Prezi presentation, so it's actually a link. But the link can be shared, and you know, I don't care about any of that, like if you use it. I am a principal consultant at Global Impact Assessment. I work with companies that are building and developing, this isn't a plug, I mean, I don't do anything. They get work and they say, can you help us? And I show up. I don't, you know, but it's interesting that more and more companies are realizing that sustainability is important. They want people to look at the work they're doing and help guide their clients into making some of these better choices. The book in the middle, I got elected to kind of give the talk about Locate Press because I'm the bad child in the group, probably. I'm probably the farthest behind on their book, but I got 4 chapters done, guys. I'm working on it. So Locate Press has a booth in the main room, and we're going to be auctioning off, not auctioning, what's the word I'm looking for? Sweepstakes. Raffling, sweepstakes. Books will be yours if you win. How about we just go there? But what you have to do is you have to fill out a piece of paper, and you have to do it sometime in the next 24 hours, because then on Friday? Oh, okay. Well, you better get on it. Keynotes tomorrow, the books will be given away. And it's kind of like, I think we're going to do like first come, first serve. You get to pick the book you want, sort of a thing. And so the book that I'm working on with them is Geospatial Data, Science and the Art of Storytelling, how we can take the data that we use and the information that we're generating and tell compelling stories about it to motivate change. A lot of you have grabbed the Python book, that's gone. The Geospatial sequel, I'll have a couple copies tomorrow that I'll just have on hand. And if you have any questions, we have a few minutes because we had run, we started a little late. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
This doesn't work anymore, but do you have questions?
Oh, yeah.
Should I go? Oh, wait a moment. It works.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting talk. How do you see the tension between, some of these efforts to make communities and cities more livable and sustainable, and some of the criticism of these data-based kind of technocratic approaches as being kind of not necessarily reflective of the community needs or perhaps promoting gentrification in communities? And how do you kind of square those two perspectives?
Well, it's definitely not about gentrification. That's not the message, but you're right. That seems to be what happens is we want to move people out and move things in, and that's got to be built into these communities that have stepped up, that are wanting to reclaim these communities. They're not doing it to put in but that's all zoning. They're not doing it to put in expensive townhomes or things like that. Usually when you have people working towards these sorts of goals, they have these really strong, well-articulated objectives, right up front. But you know what you're seeing out there, and it can be problematic. But we always include people from the community in the conversations, absolutely. Because there was a time when people look at the model in New York and they're like, well, I'm going to close down some roads and I'm going to put in we're going to do outdoor dining and we're going to do this. And then people, we're like, well, we're going to lose 180 parking spaces if you do that. These parking spaces are free. Now you want to build a parking deck where I have to pay $1.50 an hour. So this is where you get the community to weigh, and then people have to take a step back. Because if you don't live in the community that you're trying to, evolve, then you may not want to be the loudest voice in the room, kind of a thing. So that's a very great question, because that is a lot of the backlash, that people will not allow the people to communicate, and they won't put it on the referendum because they don't want the pushback, because they have their own agenda. But a lot of these communities are in crisis, they really need something yesterday. And so they don't have adequate housing. Their places are condemned in some of these areas. But just this awareness that they didn't get there because they didn't pull themselves up from the bootstraps and they just work harder. Sometimes the structure and the choices that we make with policy and where we make decisions of where we let people live, a lot of that can be very directing in where they end up. Goes everybody numb? It's just like cold. Everybody's like.
Any other question?
Oh, we got. Uh-oh.
No.
Where is it? It's me. So when now we see with those issues with how the planning has been done, are there new laws to avoid that kind of issues, at least in the US?
Well, I mean, the U.S. is a tough nut to crack. I mean, because, you know, if you have 10 different cities, you have 10 different plans, 10 different, you know, people that can make these decisions. You know, I think now it's becoming a little more necessary because the change in climate and the lack of sustainability in some of these communities, they're just flooding out. You know, like there was that big rebuilding initiative that the current administration put out. And when I went and read the details in some of the communities I was exploring, like Detroit, you know, there's a lot of money earmarked to find out why the neighborhoods that are flooding are all where the marginalized people live and why hasn't anything been done by now. And then you go to these meetings and you get the funding allocation and, you know, well, we didn't get all the money we needed. Sorry. You know, so, you know, we try and we educate and we have people, you know, once you stop looking at like other people and you start looking at communities and you look at the built infrastructure and persistent barriers and, you know, how much impervious soil, you know, and surfaces there are and the pavement and like this is not a walkable census tract because it's all like concrete. And then, you know, they start rolling in plants. You know, it is really all the boots on the ground. It's people like us. It's people like the people that do the work at OpenStreetMap. I just spoke at State of the Map, the US version, and everything that they're measuring is just tremendous and admirable. Like I wouldn't think the way they're, because there's no addresses in the Indian slums for the most part. They're trying to just get addresses in places and they're going door to door to door, you know, and there's a lot of rural places in the South that there aren't any addresses. It's like, well, you know, make a left at the old basket where we used to keep apples and then make a right at, you know, the cow that's always wandering in the street and you'll find them, you know. And so there's certain initiatives that we see coming to light more where people like you know, and us are leading the charge and making people aware of what's going on in the community and how this is all accessible for the most part. Accessible meaning it's there. Now, we need to improve that with STEM and people that can code and people that can run the software and people that are aware of the software. And that's kind of where I'm noticing a little bit of an uptick. I just judged a big, this blew me away. We were at North Carolina, it's a high school of math and like engineering. And like these kids come out and they are pitching us this research that they're doing. And me and the guy sitting next to me were like, this is better than my thesis. You know, like they're being trained up to think critically and create an experiment, test the experiment. And in fact, the winning presentation was a group of kids that were looking at a planned city that we have in North Carolina and evaluating, and I thought it was going to be like horrible because they were talking about safety and police, and I thought, oh no, they're going to be saying send more police in. Da, da, da. They weren't doing that at all. They were saying like these certain metrics in a community decrease crime in that community. And I thought that was, and these are like, you know, we're like, oh, where are you going to college? He goes, oh, that's a year away. I'm like, oh boy. I mean, the kids coming up and really focused on this, and that's why, you know, I think there's such a reach from FOSS, you know, 4G to get younger people involved because they're very, very motivated. Justly so, in my opinion. And if anyone's working on anything in their community that they want to share too, that's always interesting because, you know, it's different wherever you are, absolutely.
We have another question here.
Hi, Bonnie. Thank you for this great talk. A lot of what you talked about made me think of The Color of Law. Have you read that book? Yeah. Yeah. Amazing book. And when
I
you
didn't think
have
this crowd. I
narratives-
didn't think this crowd want. I mean, it really is. It's an American thing, you know. Unfortunately, and I do a lot of that sort of thing in some of the talks I do that are closer to home. But go ahead.
So it's this great book that kind of lays out the history of segregation in the US. But even with evidence as he lays it out, a lot of people still aren't convinced of the connection between these various policies and the situation we have today in racial disparities. I'm curious, you know, that's a very narrative approach. You do a lot of data storytelling. I would love to hear, because kind of is the best of all the worlds. So adding in narratives, historical evidence, anecdotes, and data and visualizations. Have you had any anecdotes where you've actually been able to kind of bring people to the other side and really actually finally convince them of the intersection of all of these factors to create today's reality?
Well, see, we have this false truth in the U.S. right now that we're wrestling with, you know, about, like I said it, it's true. And I was talking to someone, and I call it the Starbuckization of fact, because, you know, we live in the U.S. where when I go to Starbucks, when I was young, you had decaf and you had regular coffee, and you went on about your life. Now I can have a butterscotch malted hummingbird milk, you know, say foam next to the cup. I mean, we have this expectation that our reality, our facts, and our truth can be customized based on what we believe. And that's very problematic, and people need to step forward and push back against it. I was at a group where I actually told them the origin of the police department being to return escaped slaves back to the plantation owners. That's where the police department came from. And so if you could be very polarizing around things like Black Lives Matter, but you have to understand, if this is an organization that has those roots and no one talks about it, I'm not saying that, you know, to change anything, but don't deny that that was part of it, because then you look like you're obfuscating something and people don't trust you. If you said, yes, that's what we did then, but here's what we're about now, or just don't hide it under the rug. And you may have heard of critical race theory being banned by politicians. And, you know, depending on even what side of the aisle you're on, you can be a social, liberal, Democrat, and why are you not saying that, wait a minute, this isn't a theory, people. They were slave ships that came here, and, you know, it happened. Like, how do we leave, like, England, and within how many years we're the next superpower? You know, it's because we had free labor, people. You know, we didn't have to pay anybody. So you just start telling the stories, not in a confrontational way. Like, when I tell a story, I'm usually like, well, isn't this interesting? But I don't say you should be ashamed of yourselves. You know what I mean? I feel like this is information that we just don't know. And I think it's a beautiful history to bring the truth and to speak the truth about a lot of these things and to understand from both sides. And I think that that's a beautiful book that kind of can illuminate. And, you know, the number one reason should be, why should I be today years old and finding about this in some book? When I was in school, nobody talked about any of this. It was the 1619 Project, where I learned that mortgages is a term from slavery. They took mortgages on the actual slaves so they could buy more slaves. So there's a lot of, our lexicon is rife for it and for the opportunity to talk. And take Germany as an example. I mean, we have an entire country that does it right. We don't have to invent anything. We can just have the same reverence for this happened and here we are today. And the same thing with places like Vienna. You know, no one's sweeping it under the rug and saying, nope, 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 that didn't happen. So, you know, the more of us that talk about it and are accepting about it and can listen to different truths, you know, the better we're going to be. So thank you for that question.
Any other quick question? Because we are slightly over time. Yes.
But also, you know, you can reach out, and if you find me, I don't know, I hang out on some of the social spaces, and I write about a lot of the stuff in a more narrative voice, and I bring in data sets that people can access and download, and sometimes upload videos of how to look at this type of data and how to look at that type of data. So if you're interested in this sort of a thing, or climate or sustainability, we can continue the dialogue. Yes?
Just last one question. Did you try your algorithm, walkability algorithm on Prizren before coming in?
Wait, you said something about an algorithm?
The walkability of Prizren, did you try to assess it before coming in?
I can't.
Walkability.
Yeah, if you try the walkability index on this in this city just before coming here.
No. Because I respect the fact that I got to tell you, I am just blown away by Kosovo. And I'm going to tell you a funny little story. I was asked to speak at FOSS4G, and I thought they meant Baltimore. So I was like, I sent my stuff in. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'd love to have you be a keynote. And I'm like, Prizren? Where's... So, I mean, it was such a lesson for me that I wanted to be respectful of the complexity of a place that has this robust and sometimes contentious history. I rarely talk about places that I'm standing in, unless it's Washington, D.C., because I'm just like ready to go.
Thanks a lot again. Also for reminding us how open source can be used. I think this morning we saw more about the commercial application, and now you reminded us that also open source is the foundation of science, of research, and also of policy and decision making. I think this is very important, and it's really thanks to this beautiful software that this community is offering us.
And there's one more thing too, like if you are in your organization or in a passion of yours, if you're called upon to speak on these sorts of topics, I have never been told what data set to bring with me when I go and I speak. So I make sure, like all the books have this sort of stuff that is part of my ethos and what I believe to spread the word. So you can pack anything you do and you write. You can talk about communities. You can talk about climate if that's your jam. You don't have to sit there and look at a superstore worth of data. You know, you can be innovative and use different data sources. My area of expertise is in the U.S. Census. So there's a lot of different stories that I tell there, and that's a data set that I travel with a lot. So just remember, when you are privileged enough to be able to lead a conversation, be part of a conversation, think about the data questions that you want to formulate and bring, and if they're making a difference, or they're just saying you sold more pencils last quarter than the quarter before. That's not really moving the needle anywhere in a profound way that we really should be directing our conversations towards. Sorry, it just made me think of.
Just to close, some logistics. So now there's the icebreaker party waiting for us in the main area, and tomorrow the conference is starting at 9 sharp here with 2 keynote speakers. That's it. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you.